Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Forest Stewardship Workshop webinar. Tonight's session is about wildlife camera use for private forest landowners. And we have three guest speakers tonight. Chris Horton, Valerie Elder, and Robert Douglas. I will have each of them introduce themselves at the beginning of their piece of the webinar. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Chris, who's going to start us off tonight.
Okay, hopefully you can see that full screen. Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Chris Horton. I'm a landowner. As of a couple of years ago, my family purchased 60 acres of forest up near Oakhurst in Yosemite. And so I'm going to talk to you about um, why we wanted cameras, what we went through in the decision process, what I ended up with, and then I'm going to try and leave half my slot for questions that you've got. So part one, why did we want cameras? I've been going up to Yosemite in the wilderness for, pretty much my entire life since I was a kid. I love the outdoors. I love nature. I love animals, but I don't get to be up there all the time. I live down in LA, work down in LA, so I only make it up there occasionally. So one of the main reasons why I wanted cameras was to live vicariously through them, see what's on the property, what's roaming around, who's there, what families come back, who's raising a family, and then it also gives me insight into what is active, what times of the year, where are they on the property, what are they doing. And then finally, if you get a grant, an RCS grant, there may be some things that you can qualify for if you do data collection. And I think you'll hear from some of our other speakers, there's some interesting data collection and citizen science opportunities that I myself am still learning about and maybe will participate in. So that was the number one reason. And just to show a couple of the images, on the last one you saw a bear family, here's a deer family. I get an image like this almost every year, which I love to see. We get coyotes and foxes, all kinds of different bears. This is Fisher on my doorstep. One year and only one year, we got a bobcat. It's a little hard to see. It's in the right side over here. And we get quite a few mountain lions. And some of the photos I have two mountain lions together. So I don't know that they live there, but they make their way through. And then my wife and I had this running joke about the ringtail. Yosemite has some ringtails in the visitor center, some stuffed ones, but we've never seen or heard one. So we thought they were imaginary animals, and I was thrilled to see one show up on one of our cameras. So the second reason that we want a camera is to know what is the state of the property. Um, is what's the weather like up there? Fire is a real issue. So can we see smoke? Is something going on flower wise? What's blooming? Weather status? Can we even make it up? Is the snow too deep? Is it raining? Things like that. And to give you a sense, this is a picture from earlier this year, and that is a tree down in front of our cabin. And when we got up there, there were down trees everywhere. So there was a wind event, broke a whole bunch of cedars all over the property. And I knew from this picture that I needed to bring some extra chainsaw equipment. And then I've got a camera that is looking down on a portion of the property that sends me a picture every day. And I've got a post there with some markings on it. It's a little hard to see in Zoom, so I put a red line on the screen where it is. And this lets me get a sense of when it's snowing, what the snow is like. And so here's a picture from the winter. You can see just the tippy top of that pole sticking through, and that's about a 5 foot tall pole. And then the third reason is for security. There are people who trespass. We want to know what's going on, keep an eye on things, make sure everything is okay, just in case we need to call the neighbors or something. And cameras can both capture what's going on, but they can also be a deterrent. If people see a camera, maybe they'll think twice. So here's some examples of people. This is, about a quarter of the mile down the road of the property. These people thought it'd be nice to go hiking. Here's someone who biked past our gate, looked right into the camera as he was riding by. But the trespassers are not always people. Sometimes it may be cows. We have some free range cattle that find gaps in our fence and sometimes make it onto the property. So in terms of equipment, I'm going to talk about, some of the factors that went in, but in retrospect, I think if I was giving someone advice, I'd say try and figure out why it is that you're wanting cameras first, and then look at the different choices you have, and based on that and what's in your budget, that will help you make the decision. So I'm going to kind of talk through some of these choices, and then I'll talk about how that impacted my decision. So one of the first things is the quality and reliability. And it's really easy to go onto Amazon and find some of these super cheap cameras, which is honestly the first thing that I did. So I bought this really cheap Spy Point camera. It lasted less than a year and then gave up the ghost. So as a quick way to get in, it was fine, but ultimately it wasn't robust enough for the realities of the Sierras. One thing that everyone thinks about when they're thinking about cameras is resolution. And these days, most of the cameras that you'll find have crazy high resolutions advertised. The cheapest camera I have was like 25, $30. Talks about a 48K resolution. And in reality, what these cameras do is they upsample, so they've got a lower resolution and they use software to improve the resolution. And you can often tell by looking at the difference between what you get from a picture and from the video. And the video is typically like the actual resolution. There's also a difference between what the camera stores and what it sends you. And on the right here, you can see the top image is the image I got in email, and the bottom image is the image that was actually on the SD card when I got access to it. And there's a reason for that. It's bandwidth and storage space is an issue. So I think most cameras are probably going to have good enough resolution for most things these days, and just take the advertised resolution with a grain of salt. But you can always set your camera up to take low resolution photos if needed for bandwidth and storage reasons. And then another big factor is the flash type. And there's three types of flash. White flash is like your old school visible flash photography, which is going to be very noticeable to both the people and the animals. So if your goal is to kind of scare something away by the obviousness of the flash, white flash is a great option for that. If you don't want the flash to be noticed at all, then you're on the far right of the spectrum, a black flash, which will be completely invisible because it's infrared light, and that tends to be a lot more expensive. So if you want something that's a compromise, then you go with the low glow flash in the middle, which is a red light. It's visible, but maybe not as disturbing. It may not disturb all the animals. Some people may not notice it, and it's cheaper. And then there's a question about, do you want video or still photos? And this is partly related to how you're going to get these photos. So what type of connection you have, how long between access. So do you have constant access to the photos because you're there on the property, or is this something that you're going to infrequently like me? Still photos, obviously, less battery life. You can have more of them. Videos take up a lot more space. And if you want to send them, that's a lot of bandwidth. One thing to note is if you're looking at video, make sure that you're paying attention to the frames per second. Like a normal video is 24 or 30 frames per second. And I think some of the cheaper cameras may offer something like 10, which is not great. A lot of these cameras that do photos can also do photo and video. So you can get both, but obviously that's going to give you a bandwidth hit. And you can typically adjust the clip size and the resolution if storage is an issue. This is an example of the Fisher video that came with that photo that I posted, right? And it's kind of cool to see Fisher on camera. So um, connectivity is a big one depending on your location. So if you've got constant access, meaning you're on the property all the time, then maybe you only need an SD card, which you have to walk around and pull from the camera itself. If you're not there or the cameras are spread out, Wi-Fi, if you've got a power source, if you've got a router that's got an always-on Wi-Fi connection, that may be an option for you. If you've got something that's spread out or you can't access or the camera's going to be farther away, cellular is kind of the de facto standard for a lot of these cameras. And the upside of both cellular and Wi-Fi is that you can get a picture of something as it's happening, depending on how you've set your camera up. But you have to pay attention to coverage. So on my property, I don't have cellular coverage in most places. I only have a couple places on the property where I can get any kind of cell signal, and I don't get coverage from all networks equally. Certain networks work better, and so you have to pay attention to what networks are supported by the particular camera. Many of the cameras support multiple networks, so that's typically not too big of a deal, but it's something to pay attention to. And then if you do need a cell plan, you're paying extra for that. Then the final thing that you can get is a mesh network, which is where you've got one camera that's talking to the cellular network, and then the rest of the cameras have a radio network between them, and they're talking to each other. And so that's what this represents. That bright green camera in the middle is the one that has the cellular connection, and then the other cameras are spread out over the property, and you can see that they're talking to each other. They're forwarding the photos that they take on so that you don't need coverage over the entire property. And then this is an example of what your plans might look like. The left plan is the mesh network plan, and this covers the entire network. So that's 2,000 images a month for the entire network versus the bottom right, which is a per camera plan. That's assuming that each camera has its own cellular connection. And notice that one has video and one doesn't. Power is another issue. This again is a function of how often you have access. A lot of these will just take regular D cells for D cells. Some of them will take lithium double A's. Many of them have built-in rechargeable packs, especially the lower cost ones. And then a lot of them can take solar panels or have solar panels built in. And in the case on the right, one of the systems I have has two different options for solar panel. One is a sunny area and one is a shade, and the shade is just larger so that it can, you know, generate more electricity from less light. And typically you'll end up with some combination. You may have a combination of regular D batteries backed up by a solar panel that's got a rechargeable battery pack in it. And then the last thing that you may want to consider is, do you need some kind of protection? So there's a case that you can buy for a lot of these cameras, and that case will typically just protect the camera body itself. It could be bears that want to scratch their back on the tree or the camera. It could be falling limbs. It can also be theft, so that will give you a lock point. A lot of these cameras have holes that you can run a cable lock through, but if it's a plastic camera, it's pretty easy to break that. So the metal case gives you some additional protection, and the cable lock will prevent the camera from just being taken. Of course, it's a cable lock, so someone who's determined can, if they happen to be hiking with bolt cutters, that's not going to be great protection. And as I mentioned earlier, you can use cameras as deterrents. So if you have a camera pointing at a gate, for example, that person who's thinking about trespassing may think twice, and you may have a second camera filming your first camera just in case they, think that they're going to do something to your monitoring camera. You've got some evidence there. And then one reminder that all of this protection won't do anything to protect your solar panel or your antennas. And so I have at least one camera where I think an animal came by and scratched itself and ripped off the antenna. There's a bunch of other factors I'm not going to talk about. I'll just mention them in passing. Like how often do you want to get images? How much control do you want remotely? How easy is the interface to use? How far away can the cameras take photos from? What type of reporting do you get? I'll show a little bit of that later in my system, but I'm not going to get into details of that. So understanding that all of those various factors, at that point, you can say, okay, if reliability is important, that's going to be a slightly more expensive camera. And if you want black flash, that's going to be slightly more expensive. High resolution, slightly more expensive. How many cameras do you want? Obviously, that's going to be a big impact on the cost. How many cellular plans do you need? What kind? How many photos do you want? That's going to influence cost. And then all of the additional accessories like the batteries and the solar panels and the SD cards and all of that stuff. So when it came to me specifically, because I wanted to monitor wildlife and I wanted to have cameras around the property, I was looking at multiple cameras with black flash. And because I didn't have cellular connection all over the property, that meant I needed a mesh network and I wanted to see what was going on. So I needed a cellular connection with a mesh network. And I'm in a forest, so I couldn't just rely on solar. I have a combination of D-cell battery packs with solar panels that have rechargeable batteries inside of them. And then on top of that, I just want to see every day what's going on. Is there snow or is there rain or what's happening? So I wanted a camera that can do daily check-ins. And the first system that I got, which was the Cuddy Link system, did not do that. So I got a secondary camera that does um, daily photos, which is a Tacticam. And I'm not endorsing these. These are just some examples of things that you can get, right? And then later I saw it might be fun to have some video. So I got some low cost cameras off of Amazon that don't have any type of connection, but the Fisher video that I showed you came off of that camera. So it's pretty good video for relatively low cost. This is what the Cuddybacks look like. The old model is the J model. There's some other models. The new one is called the L series, and the L series goes for about $100 these days. And this is what it might look like in the field. So this is the camera in a lockbox with a cable lock, and then both the camera and the solar panel, which is facing the other direction, are strapped to the tree. And so all of this together, if you buy it separately, is going to run you about $230. But you can often find package deals that come with either multiple cameras or bundles of cameras and panels and locks. And there are also quite a few people who are selling used cameras on eBay or elsewhere. So you typically, if you hunt around, don't have to pay new prices for that. And then this is the home camera. So this is the camera that does not actually have a camera in it. This is the base station that talks to the cellular network that all the other cameras are talking to. And this is the type of communication that I get from these cameras. So whenever something happens, I will get an email from this system with the photos that I can click on and see a larger instance. It's still low resolution compared to what the camera is actually taking. So I have to physically access the camera to get the high resolution images. And then I get a report, which is down below on the camera status. So you can see I've named all of them. I can see how good is the connection, what's the battery status, how many days has the battery been or the camera been powered? Are there any images that haven't been sent yet? How much space I've got left on the SD card? And so if you'll notice, this Meadow camera is surprising. When I looked at it, has been active for 4 years running. And then this is the reveal camera. So this is the camera that sends me the daily pictures. And this is the El Cheapo Amazon camera that does video, and I access it when I go up to the property. And so on the left here, there's an app for Reveal, and it sends me additional information, about the weather. And then on the right is the other camera. If you're connected to it, when you walk up to it, it has a Bluetooth connection, and you can see what's on the camera and flip through and delete and save. And what I'm showing you is not that portion of the interface. This is the downloaded stuff, but it looks similar. And then if you click on one of these videos, then you'll get something similar to what I showed you before, where you get the video, and then if you look along the bottom, you get some weather information. This is telling me what time it was taken and what the temperature was. So I will stop there and let you guys ask questions.
Thanks, Chris. Great photos, great information. There was just one question so far in the chat. How many cameras do you have linked to your base?
I want to say I have something like 8 cameras now, and they're not always active. So sometimes what happens is batteries will run out on one, especially over the winter. So I'll put new batteries in, maybe spring, summer, and then when it starts to snow and it gets dark, the solar panels can't keep up. The D cells get exhausted and the camera will die. And so at some point, I have to wander around the property and then put new batteries in.
Mhm. And do you happen to know, is there an upper limit of how many cameras can be linked to a base?
I'm sure there is, but I'm guessing it's probably something like 16. we can probably look online while someone else is speaking. I could paste it in the chat as I find it.
Oh, that'd be great. Do you post any type of signage?
I have regular no trespassing signs on the perimeter of the property and then a couple of other places like on the road. But otherwise, I don't have anything near the cameras themselves.
Mhm, mhm,
And then someone asked, how often do the cameras die?
mhm,
They go pretty long. I mean, as you could see from that report, which I pulled, I think yesterday, most of those cameras have been live for at least a year. So I find that there's some spots that are dark and they typically last, say, 9 months or so. But a lot of the other places, I strategically put them in the sun, so that I've tried to find a gap in the trees where I know that I've got at least, maybe an hour of sun a day. And if there's not a lot of activity, I find that's typically enough.
mhm, mhm, mhm.
Can you go into more detailed review of Cuddyback versus Tacticam? So Tacticam is a cellular connection per camera. And so for my purposes, if I want to have broad coverage, it's just not going to cut it. The only mesh network that I found was the Cuddyback system, CuddyLink. There may be new systems now that have mesh networks, and if someone else knows of any, feel free to post in the chat. But as far as I know, that is the only mesh network system on the market, and it's worked pretty well for me. I have had, I think, maybe one or two cameras die, but generally, it works well. If anything, I get a lot of pictures of nothing. It's windy and a branch moves, and I get a picture of nothing, or maybe a bird flies through and the camera's too slow to catch it, so I get a picture of nothing, but I don't mind.
Mhm, mhm. So that links to a previous question. I think someone mentioned it with the videos and motion detection. Are there, do you find any lags in the start to recording?
Yes, so two common issues. There's a little bit of lag. I find that these cameras are all pretty good. I usually get a picture of the front of the animal as opposed to just the back as they're passing through. That does happen from time to time. And another thing that will sometimes happen is that it will be blurry because they're moving too fast, but that's fairly rare. Most of the pictures I get are in focus, of the animal, but not all.
Mhm. And what do you do with your data? Do you create some sort of report or it
Um,
supports your forest
I,
management
yeah,
plan?
yeah, that's a good question. So I keep a album of what I call the wildlife, cabin wildlife. So every time I see something interesting, I add it to that album. And then I've started to go through at the end of the year and do what species did I see and just keep track of that. I had asked earlier, before in one of our pre-meetings if there was software to track individuals so I could try and figure out, is this the same deer or mountain lion or whatever coming back every year? Maybe when I retire, I'll try and figure that out. But for now, I'm not doing any really detailed data analysis.
Mhm.
But I think some of our other speakers may talk about the citizen science portion of that and may have some recommendations there.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have any thoughts on solar cameras?
Yeah, so depending on what that question means, most of the cameras that I use, in fact, let me think, all of them now have solar panels. So I really like that. That's the main way I think the cameras are powered, except in the winter. So I think that it's kind of been a lifesaver because I think maybe when the solar panel died or before I had solar panels, like I was swapping out a lot of batteries. So once I went to solar panels, it really changed the game for me.
Mhm, mhm. And for those that have cellular connection issues, can you expand a little bit more on the Wi-Fi setup, especially the power drain, right? Is Wi-Fi consistently on at the camera?
So I don't know a whole lot about those. I'm going to guess that they're probably similar to the cellular cameras in that they only connect when they need to. They're not always on, but the important thing is that you have to have a Wi-Fi, router that you're connecting to. So there has to be a Wi-Fi network that's always on, and that is going to mean that you're distance limited because the Wi-Fi coverage is typically, only so large. So say that you've got a cabin with power and you've got a Wi-Fi router at your cabin, your cameras can only be so far away from that. But, I would expect that they're not constantly on the network. They're just connecting, transferring, and then hanging up, as it were. But
Mhm.
I don't have direct experience with those. So,
All right. All right. Well, thanks so much, Chris. Well, let's see, Lori, Wi-Fi are more a traditional security camera, not like a game camera. Yeah, and they use Bluetooth. Great. Thanks, everyone, for putting in your comments in the chat. All right. Thanks so much, Chris. Appreciate it. All right, I'm going to bring up Valerie Elder, our next speaker. Valerie, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks so much, Kim. And great questions from folks all around. I do have a PowerPoint that I will share now. Okay, and I am going to share a video actually shortly, which I introduce myself. So I will sort of do a short introduction here and just share that I'm going to be talking about camera installation through video and also discuss monitoring projects, specifically a project that we've been working on at College of the Redwoods for the last 3 years called Snapshot USA. And here is a photo of some of my students out in the field working on this project, and you can tell by that smiling face, they're very enthusiastic and excited about the project. So in this presentation, I'm going to share a video installing cameras on my property, a little bit of a discussion on some deployment tips, discussion of some of the monitoring projects, and Snapshot USA.
I'm Valerie Elder. I am a registered professional forester.
That works.
Great.
As well as a professor of forestry at College of the Redwoods and a family forest landowner. Today I'm going to show you how to deploy a trail camera or a camera trap to monitor wildlife on your property. Here are the supplies we're working with today. I have a trail camera. I have batteries. These are just regular alkaline batteries, but you might consider rechargeable batteries so that they have a little bit of a longer life. That's up to you. I have a 32 gigabyte memory card for my camera. That's going to kind of vary on the size depending on if you're getting photos or videos, but that's worked well for me. And I have a strap to go around my tree. Since this is on my home property, I'm not worried about a lock, but if you have other concerns about people tampering with your cameras, you might consider something like a bike lock to secure your camera to the tree. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put my camera card into the side so I don't have to worry about that falling onto the ground. When I do these on the project at College of Redwoods campus, we use Ziploc bags, and we have a set of camera cards that we can deploy in 2 sets of deployments, and that way we're able to really remember on a larger scale which camera cards that we collected on a date and put a new camera card out there. Something I'm not using today, but you also might consider is a digital reader so that you're able to view photos on your phone or another device while you're in the field. Just make sure that you are paying attention to the terminal direction for your batteries. So I'm going to install those now. The next step is just to turn on your camera and either pull up a guide that's available online for your camera, or if you still have the documentation that came with your camera, to review how to change those settings. It's really going to vary based on the device that you have. But you turn the camera on, and typically there's a menu button and some kind of arrows to toggle around. You check your settings based on the specific protocol that you're trying to follow. I'm looking for a photo burst setting so that it takes multiple photos. So when a wildlife species is walking through the view, you don't just get grass rustling ahead of the species traveling through. You can actually get the image of the species as it walks through. So typically you're using some kind of a burst mode, and you really want to decide if you're going to use video or just still photos, depending on how frequently you're going to check these cameras, how much capacity you have to store them. Another important step at this stage is to be sure that the date and time on your settings is accurate. That's just going to help with better data collection procedures, and you'll know exactly the day and time that that species traveled through your property or place that you're observing these species. Once your settings are how you want them to be, you can close up your camera. And again, this is going to vary by model. Put some kind of a strap or cord through the camera. Great. So then you're gonna find the best site to set up your camera. You wanna make sure you know which direction is upright on your camera, so you're not setting it up upside down. And you'll attach the camera to the tree. My protocol that I work with is knee height, and that's to ensure that we catch critters that are running along low to the ground, some of our smaller mammals, as well as larger species like a deer, maybe a mountain lion. So knee height helps us achieve that. We also want to be parallel to slope rather than looking uphill or downhill, because it just makes it hard to get the settings correct with your field of vision with the camera and capture images of species running along the ground. So parallel slope helps us achieve that. So we're going to attach the camera, then okay, and you want to adjust this again so that this is sort of straight, parallel to slope, knee height. And you don't want this strap to be too tight. Your tree is gonna grow throughout the year, and we don't want the strap restricting the tree, or sometimes when it grows, it makes it hard to adjust the lock. Different cameras are gonna have different systems for securing the camera as well. So you do just wanna make sure that they're well secured to keep moisture, insects, and other debris out of the camera device. Another thing you want to be aware of is vegetation in front of the field of view that could trigger the camera. So you might weed whack or trim up with pruners or other tools vegetation that might trigger the camera. Or you may consider this as far as how are we going to locate your camera, putting it in an area where that's not going to be as much of an issue. Sometimes sunlight changes can cause false triggers for your cameras too, so that's just something to be aware of. When you're considering locating your camera, try to look for places that wildlife might be traveling, might be nearby a water source. I selected this location because there's a small footpath that wildlife are using. There's also a log here that might be something of interest wildlife might climb on. Sure that you record the location of your camera. You might use a phone app or a GPS unit if you have one. And you may consider some kind of a note-taking tool like a data deployment sheet that has the date and location and any notes, like I had to clear the vegetation. So then you remember to bring your saw or other tools with you to monitor that. It's really going to depend on the scale, how many cameras you put out, but it is pretty easy to forget about where you located these. Also might even take a photo of the camera placement in case someone's going to help you collect those camera cards later, and that might make it a little easier for them to find the camera. You could also consider providing some details like the camera is located approximately 100 feet from my fence line in a grove of oaks by the road. So that's just going to help you locate these cameras later. Also consider how frequently you're going to be checking these cameras and make sure that you're considering some maintenance for them. Cobwebs, tree sap, there's lots of things that can sort of obstruct the camera. So you might have a little cleaning kit with you as you go check your cameras. You also might consider a case. Sometimes I utilize a metal case to protect the camera. You never know when a friendly bear is going to check out this camera. That's all for now. Happy camera trapping. I'm Valerie Elder.
Okay, well, thank you for joining me for that video. It ended up being a really nice day out here, but I was worried about giving that presentation in the field in the rain today. So a couple tips to sort of review some of the things that were covered and some other things to consider when placing your cameras are to sort of look for openings in vegetation. Our species are more likely to kind of travel in those openings, places that we want to walk, they might want to walk as well. And if you're having a hard time getting that camera parallel to the ground, you could use a stick or a rock to ensure that it's at the right angle. So putting that little stick or rock in between the tree and the camera, as shown in the right side of the screen, to adjust that. If you're in more of an urban area, consider placing this in a spot where you're not going to have as much human traffic, unless, as kind of Chris mentioned before, that is sort of a goal to see if people are walking onto your property or not. I work on a college campus for a lot of my camera trapping, and so we're really restricted in areas where we can have those cameras and where we can't. We really want to minimize having people in our photos. And another step is to kind of take a test photo during your camera deployment to check the angle, to check that it's correct. The protocol I work with is actually a selfie to determine, then who, when. It's sort of proof of deployment. But, and if you're bringing a reader with you, you can check that camera. The reader I have, or that camera I was deploying in that video, actually has a screen, so you can pull it off and sort of check right there. There's nothing worse than sort of setting up this camera, putting the batteries in upside down, forgetting the camera card, or having it set up as a wrong angle, that you only find that out 6 months later, for example. Also, it's really important to trim the vegetation and kind of pick your sites carefully with that. And try to avoid placing that camera out of the sun or face it sort of north or south to avoid those sun triggers. Sometimes that's hard to avoid, and of course vegetation grows, but you can get a lot of false triggers from grass that grows up and blows in the wind, and the camera is going to pick that up too. For our camera traps in the protocol that we're working with for the study, we want to place them about 200 meters to 500 kilometers apart. And that is to try to provide adequate spacing across the property and avoid getting species right after each other. And so that you're kind of getting unique species. They still might kind of travel through those different cameras, but that's just the protocol that we work with. So consider how far apart you're going to space your cameras. And again, the field protocol we work with is knee height, and that's really with the focus of getting mammals. Because we want to be inclusive of large and small mammals, knee height is that middle ground to capture those. No bait is used, no food or scent lures. If you have special permits, that may be possible, but most people don't have permits for that to be allowed, so you shouldn't be using bait. Considering your spacing. The settings that we use, and Chris went over some of these as well, we use a high trigger sensitivity, about 0.5 seconds. We use only pictures, no video. We try to do this burst mode of 3 to 5 pics per trigger. I explained that in the video, but the idea is we're not kind of just getting grass before the deer walks through. We're trying to actually get the photo of the species, and that's going to take more than one picture in most cases. So we don't want to delay between triggers. Some cameras you have to have 1 second delay, and that tends to be fine. And this is the Reconox model that we utilize on campus. So I've mentioned the Snapshot USA project a few times, so I'll spend a little bit of time explaining what that is. We joined this study about 3 years ago, and the vision of this project is to provide large-scale surveys for annual assessments of mammal populations. In wildlife research, there's always limited time, money, and funding, and so the team behind this project thought, hey, can we really capture the interest of people across the nation? And actually they've deployed this in other countries as well, to follow a scientific protocol, utilize citizen science, and create a large data set that we can use. So the goal is long-term mammal monitoring, long-term monitoring of mammal populations. We're all using a shared protocol, and there's an annual data collection project. This creates a national data set, and researchers are able to analyze trends of mammal communities related to a lot of different factors. And I'll go over some of the examples of some of the studies that we've utilized. So here's the Snapshot USA team. They're based out of the Smithsonian. I work, mostly on this project pretty closely with Bridget Rooney and some of her associates, but the other big researchers here are Ronald Kays, Bill McShay, Mike Cove, Catherine Keim. Some of those names you might have noticed before, but it's also a partner project with the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences as well. And on the college's Redwoods campus, I work with some of the biology faculty, but we deploy this project in our fall wildlife biology and management course, so students get hands-on experience deploying the cameras, which is why I went over so many of those basics in that video. Is a lot of times we don't have those field skills, and they're getting all the experiences of, oh, my GPS isn't getting a single signal, experiences writing data sheets, deploying the cameras, reviewing, and completing some basic analysis. So it's been a really beneficial course for us on campus, and some students in the natural history class, as well as campus-wide BioBlitz, also utilize some of the data. This is what it looks like on a national scale on folks that are included. You can see that this really leans towards professors at colleges as the principal investigator. We also have some students, as well as research associates, undergraduate students. But then if you look kind of towards the bottom, there's property or resource managers, there's volunteers, there's community group leads. So there's no reason that within the ANR network or a landowner couldn't participate in this study utilizing this protocol. And I think that's a really cool opportunity. So there were 154 PIs for 187 different sub-projects in 2024, and it is leaning mostly towards academic institutions, but it doesn't have to be that way, which is part of why I'm sharing this with you all today. Here's what the map looks like as far as the projects in 2024. We're working on the 2025 projects. That paper isn't out yet, but we had 2,746 locations, 186 camera arrays in 49 states, heaps of camera detections, and 99 mammal species across lots of different ecological divisions in our country. So then what do we do with this multi-year data? Well, here's an example of one of the papers. This project started in 2019, and so we have kind of this information about the first 5 years of this study in a paper where folks that contribute to this project are included as co-authors. So if you're interested in getting involved in research, you can be listed on this paper's development. Here's kind of an example of what the field protocol looks like when we're working on this project. You'll sign up, and I have the website listed later in this presentation. The project happens September through October with a 2-week leeway on either side. And so that's the data collection period. I keep our cameras up year-round on our campus, but this is when we're following this protocol strictly and collecting the data with my students. You kind of select whether you're in a urban, suburban, rural, or wild environment, what your habitat type is, and ideally you have 15 to 50 locations. We have about 13 cameras that we utilize. We end up collecting from about 10 sites because inevitably in a college classroom, I have students, something happens to a few of the cameras. So you can get away with less cameras as long as you're strict on your protocol. But the goal is to get 400 camera nights. They prefer 600 or more camera nights and a minimum of 8 cameras to participate in the project. You can move the cameras if you want to survey other places. Why 600 nights? Here's a study that's showing the number of species that we see with those cameras and kind of this plateau that happens at that 600 night mark. And so this 400 to 600 nights is sort of this goal, so we can see as many species during this monitoring time as possible. That September through October timeframe was selected mostly because it's like we can get out in the field in most places in our country during that time frame. There's not a lot of snow, maybe it's not too hot, and it does coincide with the academic calendar. But the 400 to 600 night rule is to really try to capture as many species as possible during the project. As part of the Snapshot USA project, we utilize a website called Wildlife Insights. We upload our images and we utilize AI technology to help identify, locate and identify some of the species. So we upload everything. Because I'm on a college campus, I do go through and delete people's faces, although this software also removes people before it's uploaded. It also blocks any endangered species from being uploaded if they're identified. So those locations aren't shared. Then typically one of my students and myself go through these images, check if and verify the AI software's usefulness, and verify all of those images. Wildlife Insights is a great website. It's not insanely user-friendly. It does take a little bit getting used to, but it's really nice for managing and identifying bulk images. You can see that I have 3,000 images here, and that does take a long time to go through. It's really nice to kind of go through reviewing and checking those rather than spending a lot of time looking for them. And sometimes it finds things that I don't see just with the naked eye looking at an image at first. So it speeds things up a little bit. Utilize kind of a filter to go through these images. They are sequenced, so if there's an image burst and it's all kind of the same deer, they sort of stack together as well, which is nice. So in Snapshot or in Wildlife Insights, again, we're using AI to help ID the species. If somebody needs to go through and confirm those, we delete people. Endangered species are obscured. And that's kind of what that looks like. Here's sort of the timeline if you're interested in this project. In August, registration closes. You deploy those cameras in September. We typically do about a month deployment and then collect those camera cards to double check that everything was deployed correctly, upload those photos, start identifying. At the same time we're out in the field collecting that camera card, we're putting the new one in there, and then we check it one more time, and then that last camera card stays up all year round after we've collected it twice. And then they start recruiting for the next project. Here's a kind of a fire hose of some of the different papers that have been utilizing this data. So this collection really does matter. They've utilized these to sort of understand. An interesting one was sort of, how wildlife use of campuses changed during the pandemic. When people left campus, they were able to monitor that because they started this in 2019 and after. They've really kind of gone through how do we utilize citizen science to collect this type of data and sort of prove that effectiveness, or discuss that effectiveness rather. And here's they're really looking at kind of some of this biodiversity. So it's a pretty exciting project as far as people are able to utilize this data because of the rigid protocol following. Looking across different landscapes. Understanding different communities and ecoregions. There's a study utilizing this data. And a real benefit that impacts my life, of course, is in my teaching and utilizing this to improve field skills for undergraduate students, giving them experience deploying cameras, following a field protocol. But that can be useful as a forest landowner as well, improving skills in wildlife identification. It's a lot more fun looking through a camera and identifying species than just reading about it in a book. Experience analyzing data. For us, engaging with our outdoor campus and getting students connected with campus, but for you, it might be just connecting in a different way to your property. And it's fun to be involved in a national research project. So here's sort of the diversity from 2024 across our campus. We had 20 different species, 9,000 in change images or wildlife images that were cataloged, a lot more images taken that didn't have anything in them, which is why that software is nice for us to go through that. We had 10 cameras that were effective, 632 sampling days, 11 different locations, and 18 deployments. And that's kind of compared to that national result. And here are the species that we saw across campus. We've got a lot of deer on campus. You can see that was our most frequently occurring species, as well as people. Despite our location efforts, we still get a lot of people walking through the cameras. A lot of western gray fox, western gray squirrel, and possum species, as well as some other kind of cool things. Really trying to get the mountain lion that's spotted nearby, but so far just only a little bit of the tail. But we've had a lot of fun looking at these species. Bear, bobcat. And so here's the website if you're interested in this project and want to learn more. You can pretty much use any search engine to search Snapshot USA or save this link. And there's a sign up form and more information. The protocol is listed if you're not even interested in signing up, but you kind of want to follow something more standardized. That's all available for you online. And this was a student favorite photo. There's sort of actually a whole series of this bobcat smelling the camera, which was kind of cute. And I'll just end on that possum. So I've got a couple of minutes for questions.
Great. Thanks, Valerie. I liked the video. That was good. So, what was the camera manufacturer that you mentioned earlier that you all use?
We use Recomix. And if you sign up for the Snapshot project, there's actually a discount code to purchase those. I selected that brand based on discussing the project with wildlife professionals at like Green Diamond Resource Company and Oregon State University that are utilizing these for research. And we've really had minimal problems with these cameras, utilizing them year round for 3 years. And so they're long lasting. I know they have models that are a little fancier, like Chris had mentioned, but we kind of have a basic model where we go out and sort of deploy them and utilize rechargeable batteries so that we kind of have less logistics to worry about.
Sure. What are some of the most common challenges that students have with the cameras?
I think I covered some of those. I mean, honestly, it's kind of just like working in a team environment and you have a standard protocol doing something for the first time. And so it kind of ranges. Sometimes it's utilizing the locks. Maybe, and so we do a whole practice run through where we kind of, everybody has a chance to go through the settings, set up the camera, utilize the locks, and review the protocol. So we avoid conflict in a group scenario, because there's no way for me to be with all of the students as we're deploying these. It takes, the better part of a 3-hour lab plus maybe some extra time to deploy all 13 of our cameras across our campus. So kind of following a protocol, adjusting the settings, batteries, losing camera cards. There's lots of things that can go wrong. But that's why it's such a great learning experience.
Yeah. So you talked about using AI to help analyze the data, but do you still have people reviewing some of the images kind of to enhance that connection to nature, the location of these animals, and basically teaching your students to be observant?
Yeah, that's probably the most exciting part for students. We bring them to the card to the computer lab, and they get to sort of look at the 3 or so cameras that their group deployed. And we do an activity where I create a folder and I want them to put in the really cool photos, so that then we kind of have this short list or folder of photos that are something that they think are really cool, and then they can use those for presentations later. So they go through identify the species just on a computer. And then for the project, we upload it. And I have, a student assistant that's really motivated, or sometimes I have work study money to fund a student to work on that. But definitely that's part of the process.
Mhm. I don't know. I'll give this question to you. You might be able to answer it, or maybe Robert can next. But is it legal to install cameras on BLM land?
I'm not sure about that. I would check with your local office on if there's any permits needed. I think for bigger projects, certainly people need I think you probably need a permit, but I would probably check with the your local office.
That makes sense. Yeah. What is like one of the most surprising things that you've captured on video?
Um, I think what actually surprises me is how many, community members and students do utilize our forest. Sometimes I have kind of this impression that it's mostly just my forestry students and cross country, but that we do capture a lot more people than I expected. And so that's exciting. And then, I think with wildlife species, I've been sort of surprised that I haven't gotten the mountain lion. Our neighboring properties do get that, and I did get a tail one time. But I mean, I guess that's really relatively a good thing as far as like student safety, having that species right close to campus. But I've kind of been surprised that I haven't gotten that. We did get a coyote, which is, in that sort of dense forest is a little weird. I would think that they might be kind of in different areas. And so that's been kind of fun as well.
Mhm. So, one of the questions is, can land trusts with wildlife cameras participate in the research?
I think so. I think that would be a really good opportunity. I think private landowners could too. It's just mostly it's been academic institutions. I think it can be limiting to get that many cameras for some people to get 8. But I think zoos and other groups, there's probably small grant funding because some of these, those long-lasting cameras, I was able to get a grant to purchase those for our program. It was, it's expensive, we're talking 300 to 500 for a camera. But I think that'd be a really great opportunity for a land trust to participate in.
Well, and your comment leads into the next question. Where would you suggest purchasing the cameras?
Um, as a college, we have like different purchasing rules. So I think we purchase them through like a forestry supplier type of a company that we already had a contract with. But I think you could probably purchase them directly from the manufacturer. You might check with your local sporting goods store, more of a brick and mortar type of a scenario, or online. The cameras themselves have a warranty that you register yourself. So I think most of the if you have any problems with them, you'd have to deal directly with the manufacturer. So where you buy them probably just depends on where you want to spend your purchasing dollars.
Sure. Sounds good. All right. Thanks, Valerie. There's one more question in the chat, but I need to turn it over to Robert. Valerie, maybe you could answer it in the chat. That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Robert, you're up next if you'd like to share your screen and introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Valerie and Chris. I really enjoy your presentations. Really good information. I actually learned a lot. So advances in camera, my talk's really advances in camera trapping, kind of peeking into the secret lives of mammals on a public forest. I have worked as a state forest biologist on Jackson Demonstration State Forest for the past 5 years. I've actually spent working in Mendocino County for 25 years, worked on private timberlands and then now public forest. And I've spent a large portion of my career conducting mammal surveys on forest specialists, such as the Pacific Fisher, and looking for Humboldt marten in Mendocino County and northern Sonoma County. historically, mammal surveys that when I started conducting them were, again, done to focus on rare forest specialists following specific protocols using baited camera surveys and using chicken as bait and using long distance scent lures. And a lot of the time frames in which we were surveying were over really short time frames at specific sites. So some of the first surveys that we had conducted were often for just only 2 weeks. And then the protocols changed, and we moved over to doing 28-day surveys. But I always realized that that the time in which we were utilizing these surveys for rare species just didn't seem like it was necessary for detecting very rare species on the land. And the landscape on technology changed, because when I started out conducting these surveys, we did track plates and we used film cameras. But when the digital revolution occurred, it allowed for us to open up and use digital cameras, leave them out for longer periods of time. But while focusing on looking for fisher and marten, which we've never found marten in Mendocino County, but we have found fisher on the coast. It took about 13 years of surveying before I finally found one on the coast. We have them in the northeastern part of the county. At the same time, these efforts to survey for rare carnivores was also a great opportunity to inventory more common species found on these landscapes. So to develop monitoring programs for inventorying mammalian richness. And that's where a lot of effort had been placed into trying to understand the occupancy and distribution of these other species and how they change over time by going back to some of these sites 5 years, 10 years down the line. But as technology has changed, advances in photo processing that Valerie had mentioned, particularly with AI, has actually kind of revolutionized how we collect information, and especially because it helps us to organize large data sets. And I'm going to just talk about briefly one of the AI tools that's out there. There's open source programs such as Mega Detector, which you can get on GitHub. It filters blank from non-blank photos, and then you can develop your own custom workflows, utilize other open source programs such as Species Classifier, SpeciesNet, and Perch. And I don't use these specific AI programs, but I just want to let you know that they are out there, and there's a lot of people that do use them, and they could be a resource if you wanted to develop your own custom workflows. But like Valerie, there's also Wildlife Insights, which is web-based, and it works out really good for what I'm doing, and it does utilize its Mega Detector as in its workflow, and it also uses the AI and machine learning to identify species. But for me, the biggest advantage of using Wildlife Insights is just that the way it organizes everything for you. I'm not so much interested that it can correctly identify the species that are on there, because, as Valerie mentioned, you have to vet all the photos, and it is somewhat time consuming. But if you can have a team of people do it, it really isn't that bad when you consider the amount of information you're collecting. And here I have a screenshot of Wildlife Insights, and you can see you have these red bounding boxes where it detects there is an organism in the field of view. And here's a little close-up, and when you look at these close-up, this is one in which, like, if you're vetting a photo and you look at it, this is what comes up. You can see the author is computer vision. That's kind of the AI program algorithm that's identifying the organism, and this classified it as American black bear, and it identifies that there are 3 individuals in there. The other thing is that allows you to edit this and put in more information. So if you see particular behaviors, or you want to add data such as sex or age class, you can do that. You can develop a much more powerful data set depending on what types of questions you want to answer. And as Valerie mentioned, one of the key things that that these platforms utilize is that you want to know the battery life for your deployments, because date and time information is extremely important in cataloging these data. You put other information about your project together into Wildlife Insights, and then after you vet your photos, you're able to query the information, and you can pull out tables and put them in a relational database and develop data matrices if you want to do your own statistical analyses and modeling. And here's an example of the project that I'm going to talk about tonight. And this is a summary page, and you see the dots on the map that show where I have cameras, and just the summary page here shows that there's 33 species detected. We've generated 115,000 images, and a little under half have wildlife in them. It's actually incorrect that there are 36 locations. Those locations correspond to cameras. I actually have 18 cameras over 6 sites. And then I have 162 deployments. So every time I go out and I switch cards on 18 cameras, that's basically 18 deployments. So I've done 9 deployments over the last 3 years. It says 19 cameras because I had 1 stolen. Actually, it's up to 20. I had 1 stolen last week. So it's 2 for over the last 3 years. Not bad. So there's a lot of data that's being generated here. So, and I'm about 15,000 images behind on vetting right now. So the project I'm just going to talk about, there's 18 biological monitoring stations across 6 study sites. And these 6 study sites correspond to timber harvest plans that were harvested using single tree selection 7 to 10 years ago. And this project really is piggybacking on a fuels treatment study. We call it the fire fuels mitigation. And the purpose of the study is really to look at different fuels treatments and their effectiveness on fuels. However, biologists have been asking, wanting to know more about the effects of some of these fuels treatments. So some of the fuels treatments are mastication, which is mechanical, using a masticator attached to an excavator, which I'll show you in a second, and lop and scatter, which is sending people out in the woods with chainsaws to cut small trees down, cut small wood, chunk it up, and then also putting some burn treatments. But our focus here was to look at specifically the effects of mastication and burn at each of these sites, plus control where no treatments are. And there are 3 people working on the biological monitoring. We're working with using autonomous recording units for bats and autonomous recording units for birds, and then we're using cameras for mammals. So I'm one who's responsible for managing the data collection for the terrestrial mammals. So here's a look from one of the Reconyx cameras that I'm using, and this is a mastication site, and there's the masticator head, and this is the manipulation that occurred at this location. So we wanted to just see, do we detect changes in bat, bird, and terrestrial mammal communities as a result of mastication and then mastication plus burn treatments. Here's a little bit about just the experimental design. It's before-after controlled impact design. So we initially did some pre-treatment monitoring in the spring and summer of 2023. It would have been nice to actually have a couple of years of treatment monitoring, but we did move into some of these sites, starting the mastication in the fall and winter of 2023. And then we ended up doing the burn in October of 2024. It actually occurred within a 2-week window. And now for the past 2 years, we've been doing the post-treatment monitoring. And what I want to talk to you about tonight briefly is give you a kind of a flavor for what we're detecting out there. Now, all these data are preliminary. I haven't really started to look at and divide things up by treatment. So all the data pretty much are pooled. And then here's an example of just a frequency histogram of the 19 mammal species that we've detected based on camera location. So you can see we have Columbian black-tailed deer seen at all of our cameras, American black, followed by American black bear, western gray squirrel, gray fox, Douglas squirrel, Virginia opossum, et cetera. We did, it took probably 16 months before we detected our first mountain lion or puma. I've since probably detected, have a few more that we've detected, but haven't cataloged them in this data set yet. Most of the carnivores are generalists here, outside of a couple of the domestic animals that are on here, domestic dog and domestic cat. The domestic dog actually could be used as a surrogate for humans because that's usually while they're out there, it's a public forest. And one of the surprising things, detections that we had, most interesting was the Humboldt flying squirrel. It's a specialist. We have 4 camera locations, probably at 2 or 3 sites where they were detected. So that was actually nice to see. But one of the things by collecting so much information, what you get out here is just unbelievable that you can start tracking the seasonality of these animals out there. So here's a photograph of a Columbian black-tailed deer. The photo on the left, if you know the date, it's May 8th, and notice that it's clearly that she is pregnant and she's getting ready to give birth here. And then just 2 months and 11 days later, she goes by the same camera. I'm assuming it's her, maybe not, but going by with a fawn. And on the bottom, just as an illustration of mean detections per 100 trap days, just to kind of give you an example of some of the statistics that actually the analytics that can come out of the Wildlife Insights program. These are canned functions that they have in there that show some of the cycles of their detections. And if you look at some of the high points around here, it says where you see you're above 15 detections per 100 camera trap days on November of 2023. If you look to October, November 2024, you start seeing these peaks that corresponds with the rut. And so you're seeing some patterns here. And so this is one of the fabulous things that AI has enabled us to be able to run these cameras for long periods of time and collect information and just give us a greater understanding of what's going out on these forests, and to be able to also couple the presence and detectability of these species with environmental conditions, disturbance, recreation, and things like this will give us better tools by which we can manage and conserve a lot of the species on these landscapes. And here's another example of seasonal cycle on the western gray squirrel with respect to detections. Interesting that the right 2/3 seems to have sort of a regular pattern, but on the far left, which would correspond to a lot of the pre-treatment period, I'm just seeing some differences lots of higher detection rates, and I don't have to tease that out. Remember, I've pooled the data, so I don't know if there's any treatment effects that are occurring on the right 2/3 of this graph. I really don't know, but I do notice that it's just not kind of like just a repeating pattern here, or it could just be random. But I have a lot of questions that I'll get to when we finish collecting data and we can start teasing out the different treatment effects. Another thing with by collecting so much information, you can get at the diel or daily activity patterns of these animals, and you can classify them as nocturnal, diurnal, crepuscular, being active in the dawn and dusk, or cathemeral, could be irregular patterns, exhibited by a species, throughout day and night. And so here's an example of some of the outputs for some of the species in Wildlife Insights based on observations. Here's a gray fox. This is showing primarily a nocturnal pattern, but they are found and detected during the day. Similarly, possum showing more nocturnality, and then striped skunk, very nocturnal pattern, with really no detections during the middle of the day. Interesting. Here we have a black bear, American black bear, showing a bimodal, kind of over the diurnal period, but with some activity in the early morning and late evening. So these are just wonderful tools, and they may be different in different environments. They could be reacting to the presence of people. And if I don't know if any of you've seen, but there was a paper that came out in Science a couple of weeks ago. I think it was going back to the COVID period when the shutdown occurred, and how mammals and birds really changed their behavior when people weren't around. So on a public forest, behavior could be different than on other lands where people might not be so frequent on there as well. So I don't know, and I don't know how these will change, by looking at different, and if they will change at all for some species based on treatments either. But these are the data that are all pooled, and they give some really interesting patterns. So one of the other things that I'm seeing more that I haven't seen from in previous surveys, I'm seeing a lot of predation events documented. And here's an example: bobcat predation on gray squirrel. I have probably 10 separate events where I have bobcats taking mainly gray squirrel, but they've also seen them take a couple of Douglas squirrel and a chipmunk, and then I have one photo in the evening with a wood rat. So here is one of the outputs from Wildlife Insights where you can overlap and compare daily activity patterns. And so you see the green line corresponds with the bobcat, and then the gray line corresponds with the daily activity pattern of the gray squirrel, and then the green shaded is where they overlap. And so it makes sense that western gray squirrels are very abundant on our forest, and it seems like it's like one of the preferred prey, at least based on what I'm seeing on photos of the bobcat. But running cameras all year round is just amazing what you can see. There's so many other things that go on there. You get at just different behaviors that you normally wouldn't detect if you were just doing like really looking for presence or absence over short-term surveys. And here's something might seem trivial. We all know that we have seed predators out here. We have a rodent with an acorn. And here's a Douglas squirrel with a mushroom, so a little mycophagy. And notice the date up here if you can see it. It's also 5/8. And this is a coyote with what appears to be a fresh newborn black-tailed deer. You can see the umbilicus on it. And one of the things that I've seen at the first photo that I showed you on the seasonal cycles for the deer, it did show on that trail, seeing coyotes actually tracking the deer. So coyotes are usually following deer, looking for prey. And so this is the only clear example of predation of coyote by coyote that I have collected so far. Also, interestingly, I've detected here is a western screech owl. It appears to have something, just sticking out of its mouth like a tail. My guess is that it's probably a terrestrial salamander. But these are kind of cool incidental observations that, these cameras pick up. And also interesting behavior here. So here's a black-tailed deer. Now this black-tailed deer was moving from right to left, went out of the field of view, and then came back and looked on point. If you can see at the top of the screen, the time, and then it says look 45 seconds later, coming through the field of view is boom, a mountain lion. So that deer was actually alert that it was probably detecting that mountain lion, was on point and got out of there, and that mountain lion's looking for some dinner. So that's just some of the cool things that you can see. And then, of course, and here's the Humboldt flying squirrel. This is one of the four detections that we've had of them on the ground. They're usually primarily nocturnal and arboreal, but they do come down on the ground. And that's a very nice surprise to actually get those. But so camera trapping continues to change, improvements in the cameras themselves, image processing continue. Long-term, data-rich projects are just really more possible with the use of AI. We can, look at seasonal cycles, daily patterns, animal interactions, and then really get at, the effects of disturbance to help us make, management recommendations and how we manage people and wildlife on public forests. And this really just opens up us to being able to answer more interesting and complex questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Robert. That was great. Some great images. We have time for just a couple of questions. Can you talk about how you selected your sites for your traps?
Yeah, so the sites, well, the plots were selected. It was kind of done for us, at least the 10-acre blocks where the fuels treatment were selected basically by the people doing the fire fuels mitigation project. Mm-hmm. Now, how the sites were selected after that, I just piggybacked on the two people that were setting up for the bat autonomous recording units and the bird autonomous recording units. And I just assumed that over those 10-acre spots, they already had the stars on the paper, and I just went there and saw where they had their equipment. So I made sure I could see their equipment. Sometimes I put their equipment in my field of view, but if there appeared to be any type of flat area or a trail, I would try to orient the camera perpendicular to that. And, I followed the camera protocol that we're using from CDFW for their eco-regional biodiversity monitoring, from the biologists that are working in the cannabis program that are doing that project.